Come light it up, I'm ready to go. Come light it up, come light it up, I'm ready to go. Come light it up,
Thank you to all of you at home for continuing to watch our program today. I'm particularly excited about this panel on the future of financial services with distributed data, because this vertical, more than any other, really has some of the greatest challenges and opportunities of working across distributed data, working across different data silos. And in particular, we work with customers around anti-money laundering, risk analytics, customer 360, fraud detection, so many different use cases within financial services that we can find opportunities to drive greater revenue and lower costs. I'm joined by an incredible panel. Some of the largest banks in the world here represented today. Jay McCowan from Bank of America, Joost Stoop from Wells Fargo, and Chaitanya from Accenture, who spends a lot of time in this industry as well. And as we get started, maybe I could just ask each of you first to please introduce yourself and include something top of mind for you in data and analytics. And actually, before we do that, just to let you all know at home, we're going to take live questions on this one. So we ask you to submit those via the chat, and we'll answer them at the end to try to get to all of your questions. So with that, Joost, maybe you could introduce yourself first.
Sure. My name is Joost Stoop. I am responsible for the BICC, which is a part of Wells Fargo that manages, owns, and drives all of the BI tools for the enterprise. So we have a lot of them. So we also drive the BI tool strategy, which obviously goes to reducing the number of tools that we have in the organization.
Excellent. And Chaitanya?
Chaitanya Giram. I'm the Northeast Head of Data and Analytics for Accenture. In my day life, I work with the customers to kind of enable them in the data-driven reinvention programs. And then, two things that are on top of my mind. The first thing is bring value realization to the data. And then the second thing is, how do we actually adopt the faster analytics so that it's a near real-time replication, near real-time analytics for the customers, mainly using AI and ML routines. So those are the two things that are top of my head.
Awesome. And Jay?
Yeah, Jay McCowan with Bank of America in the Risk Technology Organization, leading our enterprise independent testing technology organization. And so the thing that's top of mind for me is really how do we accelerate time to insight for our testing teammates, right? For our citizen data scientists, how do we get them the data and the tools that they need for them to make their insights about the risks that they're managing faster?
Mm-hmm. Great. And I think we'll spend some time on that in our session here today. So this session is really about calculated speed, using data to secure long-term success. And I'd love to get some hot takes from each of you on how you think data and analytics are transforming your industry in particular. So maybe what are the top 2 or 3 novel ways that you're seeing data and analytics applied that may be a game changer for either the institutions that you operate or the consumers that you serve? Maybe Jay, we'll go in reverse this time.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. So in our space, again, I'm in the risk management space. So we have the traditional uses of data and risk management, thinking, the quantitative, financial, the risk models and anti-money laundering and fraud detection and those kind of things. One of the things that we're really focused on, besides just financial risk, is also quantifying and using data to quantify operational risk and regulatory risk. So we're finding ways to dig into our processes and the controls of those processes and pull data out of those processes, test that data, and prove in a quantifiable way whether or not those processes are under control. And then we're able to use that quantified proof as proof to our regulators as well. So it's solving regulatory risk and operational risk for us.
That's great. And I imagine, Joost, you have similar challenges, but how would you answer that?
I think we see a real trend in bringing the analytics to the end users rather than pre-rehearsed dashboards where they can only get the answers that people have developed for them. Bringing the data to the people that know their data well for, say, everyday operational type of questions, ad hoc questions, will free up a lot of the developers for an analyst for higher value type of dashboards. So this whole self-service trend, I think, is a really important part.
Makes sense. Chaitanya, what are you seeing?
Innovation is extremely important for me, and innovation through AI and ML. And I'll give you two examples. One of the examples is in the insurance space. Fraud claims happen every day, every minute. It's happening as we are sitting here talking about data and analytics. And it's very highly complicated and highly connected and administrative task. Bringing the right models to learn what happened in the last 6 years, 5 years, and bringing those solutions back to the enterprise so that they can catch the fraud in real-time analytics is extremely important. And it's how you protect your brand as well. The second thing is in the trade. The post-trade is where a lot of things really go south, when things really go bad as well. And having the right AI strategy, not just the RPA, but the right AI strategy really helps the customers to protect their brand, because that is where they look at the insights into the entire process based on the historical data. So those are the two things that I would really look at is, one, how you bring AI, ML in insurance as well as in capital markets.
That's great. Now, Jay, you had once said something like shifting the mindset from governance to data ownership, where the data owners and creators across the organization are taking responsibility for that governance, the lineage, the access, and ultimately productizing the data for broader consumption. What elements from technology, people, and process must be in place to make this happen?
Yeah, on the technology side, I think you have to have your kind of very traditional stack, right? You have to have your data stores and understand your data domains and make sure that those data domains exist, right? You have to have your metadata, right? To your data catalog so that data can be discovered, right? And then where we're moving towards is making sure that that data can easily be accessed once it is discovered, and having the technology components available for performant data access, right? Then, with those technology pieces in place, right, shifting the mindset from enforcing governance to encouraging ownership and encouraging those data owners that now have their data being discovered and have it being used, how do they control that use, and how do they enable their end customers of their data to use that data in new and exciting ways, right? And I think what we've seen with data quality is as data gets used more, data quality goes up, and you kind of hit a virtuous cycle, and then better quality data gets used more. I think what we'll also see is that similar virtuous cycle in data ownership, right? So as data owners take responsibility for their data and presenting their data to customers, their customers, the data customers will create better data quality, but they will also encourage the data owners to better govern that data. And so again, the more the data gets used, the better governance, and you, again, kind of get into a virtuous cycle.
Makes sense. And Jos, in your own charter, particularly around BI tools and the data consumers, like what are some of the downstream implications of some of the things Jay said?
Well, to do effective analytics, across a landscape of tens of thousands of data stores and probably hundreds of data warehouses that are built on top of those operational stores, it's important that the people that have the knowledge of those stores can build trusted data sets, because there's a lot of duplication or similarity between data and so on. And the end users need to know what is the right data that they can can use. So therefore, this data catalog is very important, and the ability to rise up products, product sets of data that the users can understand and use.
Can understand and trust that they're
that they're the right data.
Yep.
Right?
Makes sense. Chaitanya, what are you seeing from a broader industry perspective?
This question is very close to me, and what Jay mentioned and Jos mentioned about the importance of building the foundational aspect of it, but then comes how do you enforce it? This is where the change management really comes in. So while you're building the toll gates, you have to enforce the people and the processes and the technology to go through the toll gates, right? So you get the best of the outcome. So data is in the boardroom, and change management while you're building all this cannot be a day plus 90 days activity. It has to be a day plus 1 activity. So, and what I'm seeing in the industry is, not enabling that on day 1 has been a bigger challenge while you're building this foundational aspect of it. The faster you bring in the change management, the faster you see the value realization and frequent value realization for the businesses, so that you would see a much faster adoption into these ecosystems.
Makes sense. Yost, maybe for you, for nearly every organization that we've worked with, one of the main issues that consistently comes up is this idea that data discoverability and provisioning can be a challenge. First you catalog the data so it's discoverable, and then ensure that the right teams have the necessary access. Many believe that you need to have a single source for all of your data to solve that problem, but we all know it's much easier said than done because for the most part, your data is federated by design, which is, of course, particularly true in financial services. So I guess my question is, what are your thoughts on the challenges with how things have been done to solve the data access problem?
All right, well, I mean, the natural inclination is to bring all the data into one spot, build this massive centralized data warehouse. But we've been in the industry for a long time. We see this over and over again. I think we all know multiple of these projects that have failed. They'll never complete, and so forth. So it makes sense to leave the data where it is and provide a single access to that federated data, particularly when the data is in lots of different locations and environments. So on-prem, in the cloud, different kinds of clouds, things like that. And therefore, you have to know where that data is. You have to know about your data because it's all over the place. So that means that in that same access location, you need to have that catalog, right? So that the BI tools that I manage can connect only to one place, can inherit that catalog, and therefore the users can provide that self-service or use that self-service that I talked about earlier.
Makes a lot of sense. And maybe for either of you, I'm curious about also the people and process side of delivering on this.
Yeah. One cultural aspect of people and process here is more on hashtag data product, which is what I would call it as, is how you bring in the trust of the data across different line of businesses, even though it is federated. So creating that culture of data product is very, very important, like the way the data is growing. And if you see the trend in the last 3 years, every year it's a substantial shift in the trend. Now, customers and in the solutions in the line of business and businesses, they don't want to wait for 18 months and 2 years to see the value, right? But they want to make sure that it is repeatable, where the same repeatability is the efficiency is gained across other line of businesses. So a data product and a marketplace really gives you that measure and complements with what Yosh was saying as well.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and one of the things I think I've seen in my career, and most data engineers have probably seen this, right, is you don't want to necessarily copy the data, but in order to make it perform, you have to copy the data, right? You have to bring it to your local platform. Otherwise, dashboards take too long to refresh, right? Your processes time out, things like that, right? And so having the access layer that Yosh, you talked about, right? But then being able to make sure that access layer can perform and can handle the volume that the users are demanding, right? We're no longer just showing top level dashboards, right? There's data. Everyone wants to get down to the individual transaction, the individual record layer, right? So ensuring that you can perform with your data that you have without having to copy it. That's one of the key things that we're moving.
It definitely increases the performance problems, right? Because everyone wants the raw data to be able to dive and dig deep down, and that causes a problem with this amount of data that we are dealing with.
Yep.
Yeah, certainly at the scale that you will operate.
Yeah.
Performance at scale is critical. Jay, another thing I'm curious about is risk assessment is obviously a crucial factor of what you all do in financial services. You're always assessing risk. But I'm curious, what are your thoughts on balancing speed with due diligence and sort of that balance between defense and offense and how those analytic strategies work together, not against each other? How do you weigh those trade-offs?
Yeah, and Chaitanya hit on this, right? You can't have a change cycle that takes 90 days or even 7 days, right? You've got to have a change cycle that allows the data to get to those data scientists in near real time, right? And so one of the things that we have been really focused on is getting the infrastructure team, the technology team, out of the critical path for making data available. Right? Don't require a technology change order, a technology change request to sit between your data scientists and the data that they actually need and that they know they want. Right? Get rid of those ETL pipelines, those ELT pipelines, right? Make the data access in real or near real time and allow the end users, allow those data scientists to create their views, the data access that they need, and enable that, like you said, either day +1 or real time, day 0, right? And then you get into the governance that we kind of talked about with is the correct data being used? Is the correct data, or is it being provisioned from the correct and the authorized source? And those kind of things, again, I think as we get use and as we increase use, your data quality goes up and your data governance improves, right? And so I think they start to balance themselves out. But the key that I'm focused on is getting those data scientists the data so that they can make those insights much faster.
If I can add one point,
Sure.
I love what Jay just mentioned. In a transformation journey, where there's a balance between how careful you should be, how not careful you should be. You should never be not careful. But fail fast is extremely important, right? You cannot wait for 6 months and 8 months to fail fast on a solution or a product or what you're building in the data space. So fail fast is what I would strongly recommend. With that mindset, you can actually shift that pendulum to see how much you can accelerate and how much you can have better control of the products.
Makes sense. And maybe sticking with you, Chaitanya, I'm curious how much you're seeing cost become a factor in the decisions that customers are making, particularly in light of the uncertain macro environment that we operate in. Like, what are some of the things that you're seeing companies are doing to address cost savings?
Yeah. If I step back, Justin, if you don't mind, there are actually 3 different factors. Cost is one of the factors. It's cost, market growth, and compliance. These are the 3 things that the customer look at, right, when they actually adopt these new technologies. But cost is one of the shiny objects that we all focus on, which is very important because you see the value realization much quickly than the other 2. So from a cost perspective, there are many different measures, right? In the previous session that I was watching, one of the candidate mentioned about tagging the data, lineage the data, so you can have better insights how you're using the data. So when you actually do, like Monte Carlo forecasting, capacity planning to understand what is the metering model for your data, tagging will be extremely important. So you can actually say, this is how you're metering the data. But the emphasis is really on workload characterization. Understand your data through workload characterization. Make it very simple. The ZBD, zero-based design mindset. Only move what is needed. So do a lot of rationalization hygiene before you move to the cloud and before you move to these new data products. And then really comes in is innovation, right? It has to be a constant and a continuous innovation. So AI, ML, again, like change management, has to be at day 1. Because if you're not recording and letting the models learn the way you're operating, you cannot have a better decisions and hotspots in your data. So start early, the innovation journey. So 3 things. One is the workload characterization, and then the second thing is data lineage tagged properly so that you can have a better metering model. And then the last thing is innovation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think the cloud journey is not necessarily about cost savings, right? It's more about the benefits and the growth that it provides. It's not necessarily cheaper, or some things may be another thing to compensate for that.
Yeah, 100% agree with yours, what he said, but the cost is certainly a factor, but also what you get, the benefits out of the cloud is immense as compared to some of the cost in some of the industries.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. As a reminder again to the audience, we'll take some live questions here shortly, but before we do, maybe just one more question for you all. I'm curious, building on the previous question, as you look into the future, the next 1 to 3 years, what is some advice you would give your peers in financial services? I know there's plenty in the audience today, and every other industry for that matter, for not just surviving 2023, but really thriving, through it with data and analytics. Maybe Jay, I'll start with you.
Yeah, and I talk about this with my team, and my team brings it to me. I think you have to assume, or maybe even more than assume, you have to know that your data is not going to stay where it is today, right? It's not going to stay in the same data stores. It's going to move across different platforms. It's going to move across different geographies. It's going to move across clouds and into multi-clouds, right? And I think the key is to build your your data infrastructure and your data technology that isn't going to be tied to explicit data sources, right? No matter how great your data lake strategy is, all of your data is not going to be in your data lake, right? Know that your data is going to be in different places, and make sure you're building your technology infrastructure and your data access infrastructure that it can live with wherever your data is going to live.
Makes sense.
If I take that question, I love that question. I would strongly recommend digital data decoupling. What that means is financial services, mainly in insurance and cap markets, even in core banking, it's a very connected system. The applications, the infrastructure, the platform, the reporting engine, the innovation angle, everything is connected. If you look at a transformation journey, right, through a connectedness going from point A to point B, the value realization for the business coming out of the data analytics could take a backseat. So digital data decoupling, decouple the data, move the analytics data, get the workloads, get the hotspots, get the business insights, so business can actually see the value, is what I would recommend.
And yours?
Yeah, and I think we touched on all of the points, but especially the bringing the analytics to the end users. You know, the self-service aspect, empowering the end users, requires access to the raw data so they can dive deep. It requires intuitive tools so they can do their own querying and so forth with minimal training. And it requires a trusted data set with a very specific catalog on top with business terms and so forth, so they can understand what data is available and what they should be using.
Great. Well, we're going to go to the audience questions now. I see a number of them there. Keep them coming. You guys all operate in heavily regulated industries. You know, can you talk more about how you think compliance requirements impact the use of decentralized data? And maybe I'll add to the question, not only are you in regulated industries, but you're also very global organizations, which adds a whole nother dimension. You operate in 35 or 40 countries. There's a growing trend towards you know, federation mandated by law in a way, data sovereignty, data privacy constraints. So how do you think about all of that?
Well, one thing is lineage, right? And we've always talked a lot about lineage, but I think many organizations still depend on, you know, logs and audit logs and so forth to look at the lineage. But my finding is that it needs to be readily available the same way other analytics are, analytic data. So getting access to all that telemetry about who does what, where did the data come from, and especially when it moves from environment to environment, you know, all the way back to the source, is a whole project in itself that we should address systematically.
Yeah, if I may,
yeah.
I was addressing that a few minutes back. The data product is one of the key solutions that we see where you're looking for a trusted data, but it is decentralized. In fact, in some different form or fashion, that is also a good thing for a decentralized data. What you would like to do is, are you getting the value out of this decentralized data? But the compliance, you know, data sovereignty and data privacy are extremely important. So, you know, data products gives you a better measure, better framework to manage that decentralized data, as compared to move everything together, then apply a lot of security controls, you know, defense in depth. That will add more and more stress on these data solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. So another question from the audience is really around change management, and you know, maybe this is going into the people and process side as well here. Cultural changes that might be needed to change from centralized ownership to a more federated ownership model. Curious how you all think about that.
Yeah, and I can start on that one. So, you know, in one of my previous comments, I talked about getting rid of those data pipelines, those ETL and those ELT pipelines in favor of kind of more immediate real-time access, right? And, you know, technology teams have better things to do than move data from system A to system B and, you know, to make it accessible, right? So having a performant access layer, right, I think is key to that. And then, you know, ensuring that, your data owners are implementing the right governance so that only the correct people have access, right? Data, data sovereignty being, you know, requirements being brought into play there. And I think it's just enabled the end users and the data owners to work together, right? And to Jos's point, right, get that data, get them the correct tools that they need so that they can create those insights, right? And accelerate that time to insight.
Yep.
That's a great question. So change can be at multiple nodes, the global node and a local node. Global node is where you're talking about, the policies and standards, which is where, it impacts not just one line of business, but geolocations as well. That is where you bring in the change, the global change lead, governance, managing that and marketing that across the line of businesses. But that is not how it's going to really work when you start writing a Python script or when you start writing a data product solution. It has to be local as well. So the change agents has to trickle down the same strategy from global node to the local node. So you could see the strategy getting executed as well. So the global and the local node, it really emphasizes the importance of when you have the global presence as well as local presence for the organization.
Is there anything you want to add, Jos?
Like Jay said, the path to production, which means things that are repetitively running, for analytics should not necessarily be as heavy-handed as SDLC process, where code gets vetted, and so forth. So, and especially frequently we see that IT is still required to make those changes in production because it's a very heavily regulated environment. By being able to provide alternative scenarios where champions, for example, on the business side, can take the responsibility for moving these things over within an environment that is controlled and approved by IT, I think is a much better development and will allow much faster access to the change in analytics, right?
Yep, absolutely. This is an interesting one. How do you determine how much centralization or decentralization, makes sense? Like, when do you centralize versus not centralize?
The operating model really defines that. When you actually start working on data-driven reinvention or data-led transformation journey for the customers, the very first thing you do in your organization is you build that operating model.
Yep.
So the operating model, which is technology, business, and operations in that stack, really defines how much is central and how much is decentralized. Mm-hmm. And you also have to understand that there is always going to be a CIO or a CDO in the organization where they need the data faster. You cannot just tell them saying go through the regular process. You always have to create those processes which are fast impacting customers as well. So the operating model really gives you that perspective.
Mm-hmm. I think you basically look at the activities. If the activities are benefiting a particular silo or particular area only, then why centralize it? Mm-hmm. But as soon as you see that there's benefits of scale to create the same things once and then use those over and over again, that data warehouses, for example, that cross several areas within the organization, I think that's perfectly fine to centralize it, but not for the sake of centralizing things. Mm-hmm.
Let's see, I think this might be our last question. How do you ensure that you're not impacting the performance of operational systems when you are federating queries? I can offer some thoughts on that too. So, but yeah, I don't know if any of you want to take it first.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start, right? I mean, that's a problem, right? Especially, in kind of the space that I run, where we're reaching out across the entire firm, kind of trying to test every single process, every single, control across the firm, and many of those are in our operating systems, right? The system of origin for data sources, right? And so, we have to, in our space, we're flexible, right? We have different ways to source the data. Different, we're flexible as to when we source it, how we source it, and we work through with the individual the operational systems, right? But again, making sure that the access layer that we present to our data scientists, we make sure that has the performant capability sitting behind it, right? So think caching, think materialized views, think all of those kind of things that, from a technology point of view, we can bring to the table that allows a system to operate, but our data scientists to get access to the data that they need in, again, a performant manner.
Yep.
Thank you, Jay. Replicating the data, real-time replication of the data for analytics workload, where there could be a set of data that needs to be, kind of localized is really important, and that would improve the performance. Mm-hmm. But then this is one of the bigger problems that we all have, and unless you open the patient, you really don't know where the problem is, right? This is one of those. So proper workload characterization, looking through the lens of, where the hotspots are really helps, like what Jay is talking about. But I also think that taking a different view of replicating the real-time data to those local nodes really help, get the data faster.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, effectively, you're creating read-only data stores derived off of the operational stores. I don't think most analytics are done by getting the data directly from the operational processes, because like you said, that would be potentially, if somebody runs a very heavy query,
Yep.
very impactful for everyone who's using those systems.
Yeah, no, exactly right. I mean, I think you guys all covered it. Certainly, at least within Starburst, we do have those caching capabilities. You can, in fact, even cache autonomously. It was one of the reasons we made an acquisition last year of a company called Verada, which is now our smart indexing and smart caching technologies. But that's exactly right. You would, in those situations, try to avoid hitting the operational system directly. So I'm going to end with maybe the hardest question of all. One of the folks asked, what is your favorite food? So, Jos?
I'll go first. My favorite Dutch food is actually an Indonesian rice tafel, which is Indonesian, but the Dutch have adopted it as their favorite Dutch food. And it's 17 different dishes.
Wow.
And it's delicious. It's my favorite food.
Very cool. Yeah,
the one that I like to eat, the one that I like to cook are two different things. The one that I like to eat is an Indian food. It's called as pulihora. We actually make that in our village back in India. It's sweet, sour, and tangy at the same time. But the one that I like to cook these days is Japanese. It's called kaiseki cooking, which is the concept of cooking what grows in those 2 weeks.
Excellent. Nice. Jay?
Yeah, so I'll take anything Italian. My wife has Italian heritage on her side of the family, and any kind of homemade sauce, homemade meatballs, anything Italian works for me.
Very good, very good.